It was the spiritual sense of what does it mean to be free? And how do you find that space of freedom when everything around you tells you that that's never going to happen, that you don't matter, that you were simply born to live this existence. And that's all you or your children will ever have. But stories are really powerful things.
Hello, my lovers. Welcome back to Unbroken Chain. I'm Maura James, and this week we have one of my all-time favorite guests back for another episode. This is Jeanette Waddell, coming from Middle Georgia. She was on episode 37 last year, and Jeanette is a wise woman and a sacred elder in my community. I've learned a lot from the way that she moves through the world. And in the chaos of the last year, certainly, it felt really clear that it was time to check back in with her. The wisdom that she's carrying as a person of color, as a woman of color who grew up in the rural South and has made her life as a storyteller, carrying stories forward for my generation and the generations after me, is the work of tremendous healing and vision. And goodness, if we don't need that right now. I know there's a lot of relief in this moment that the regime is changing in the White House, but I know I'm not alone in feeling like that is the very bare minimum that could be done in this country, and one of many that are really disappointed at how the system has continued to roll on in protecting the wealthiest and whitest among us. And I don't think that that is going to change significantly unless we keep pushing for revolution in our communities and at scale. So it's with great pleasure that I got to again spend a little time with Jeanette. We took a trip to Georgia last week to finish filming for our documentary, and we're able to spend a little time socially distanced with her. There is so much inspiration in this conversation at the same time as a lot of real talk and truth-telling. And that is such a skill, to be able to look at what is broken and bring that to our shared collective consciousness in a way that we can all get our hands on it and do something about it. And dude, if Stacey Abrams in Georgia signing up 800,000 unregistered voters in time to make a real difference in that state and in our country isn't, the example of what it really means to be in service to a greater vision that benefits all of us, I don't know what is. And I'm really grateful that Jeanette has lent her voice and her wisdom, her lived experience, to invite us all into that kind of action. So without further ado, here she is, a generous, wise woman, Jeanette Waddell.
You know, this idea that, there is wisdom in the past, but I think we miss the collective wisdom if we're only looking at our own past. In this country, we tend to look at our past for answers to where we are. We certainly are not the only country that has experienced racism from its inception. Other countries have. I just think about what they did in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the value that that brought. Certainly it didn't solve all of the problems, but it really gave them a platform to begin to rebuild their country in a way that everyone could benefit. And certainly they're not there yet, but I think that some of the things that they've done have really great meaning. And, the same thing in Rwanda. I can't even imagine finding a way to reconcile with a neighbor that killed my family. while I watch. I mean, I just, and they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So there's so many possibilities. And it seems as if we're trapped in this time warp where we're a half century forward and then maybe a quarter century backwards. Mm-hmm. You know, and then we go forward again, but we're always coming back. It's as if somehow we are anchored to some ideas that we as a nation have yet to decide do not serve all of us. Mm-hmm. And I just think we need to explore human wisdom, you know, not just what has happened in our own, within our own boundaries. And I don't even know that we really understand what has happened within our own boundaries. Mm-hmm. We're not at a new place. You know, this conversation about interpreting the Constitution, and for those people who say, let's just interpret it the way the Founding Fathers intended. Well, you and I certainly wouldn't be sitting at this table with you. Mm-hmm. You know, how many generations of my ancestors would have just been slaughtered? Mm-hmm. So I certainly don't find very much comfort in someone who says that, yeah, it was a really good idea that they thought black men were only 3/4 of a person and black women were not considered people at all. Mm-hmm. That's a very scary thought.
I mean, not only do we gloss over that, but we really don't make space for the fact that those policies were put in place intentionally. Like, those men knew what they were doing.
Right. Exactly. And that for the most part, their ideals are still very prevalent in our society. And you know, I think if we were to do an analysis of where African Americans are now compared to being enslaved to the rest of the population, because you know, most whites also, while they were not enslaved, you know, basically lived in poverty, and you know, they were sharecroppers. I mean, they really did not share in the prosperity of the country. Mm-hmm. So if we were to do a comparison, I think that maybe we wouldn't relatively be very much better off than we were enslaved. And I don't want anyone to hear this and think, oh, she's saying that things are not better than, and I'm saying comparatively speaking. Mm-hmm. Certainly the country as a whole has prospered since then, and to a certain extent we have prospered along with it, but the gap between where we are compared to the people who have benefited the most from the improvements in this society, we've not shared in most of those improvements. You know, the New Deal, we really were not included in the New Deal. So all of these advancements and all of these things that have helped the general population, black people have been, they've been that last caboose. And just to get on that caboose has taken so much of our energy, our creativity, our intellectual capacity, our finances. I mean, it has just taken so much. I think, where would this country be if we all were able to give our best? If we all had the support to develop our capacities, you know, to the maximum? You know, we probably would have already had a cure for cancer. You know, we would have figured out how to grow our economy and protect the environment. You know, I think we would do a much better deal with our mental health, with our physical health. But as long as energy and effort is spent suppressing instead of elevating, we're just missing out as a whole society. I mean, it is just tragic of the waste of capacity that we're not enjoying. It can be really discouraging.
Yeah, how do you make sense of that? How do you understand why? I mean, do you see that as just more like the people in power wanting to remain in power? Or why do we live in a culture that continues to perpetuate systems that are clearly bad for most of us and really bad for a lot of us?
You know, I am really coming to believe that that might be one of our human traits. That, you know, rather than being one gender or one ethnicity, I think that might be part of what it is to be human. You know, one of the things that you know, Maya Angelou said was that nothing, and I'm probably not quoting this accurately, but the sense of her statement was that nothing human is foreign to me. So there is some of Adolf Hitler in me. I mean, that's a sobering thought. There's some maybe of Charlie Manson in me. I don't take that lightly. That's very sobering, that if nothing human is alien to me, that residing in me is Mother Teresa and Adolf Hitler, Nelson Mandela, and Attila the Hun. I mean, you know, we've got these warring factions that reside within us. And there's a Native American story where a grandfather is talking to his grandson, and he's talking about, you know, what's within us. You know, we've got the wolf and we've got the lamb, and the grandson, well, which one lives? And the grandfather says, well, whichever one we feed. So then if I know that about myself, then I have to be really careful about what I feed myself, not just physically, but even more so. What am I feeding myself mentally? You know, what am I reading? What am I watching? You know, who are the people surrounding me? Who are the influences that speak to me? So it's really important to me that that I feed myself things that are uplifting. So probably 15 or 20 years ago, I really did start giving that some thought. And you know what, murder stories were some of my favorite ones. TV shows, Columbo. I loved it when they'd have a Columbo marathon, especially on Monday, because that was my day off, and I'd get my snacks and cuddle up and all day with Columbo. NCIS, all of those. I mean, I just loved the idea of solving this mystery. And then it just hit me one day. I'm being entertained by murder. I think it's entertaining to watch people be killed. And I just stopped. I just stopped. That there's nothing entertaining about that. For me, I'm not going to judge anybody who chooses, because it's good TV. I mean, I thought the writing and the scripts and the stories were just current and spot on. There was a lot that I appreciated about them. You know, even something that seemed as innocent as Agatha Christie, Father Brown, Angela Lansbury, and I can't think, Murder, She Wrote. You know, that kind of had a humorous turn. But you know what? What's really funny about somebody being killed? Matlock.
It just normalizes it.
Yes. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but really, what is amusing about someone being murdered? Can there really be a light murder mystery? This is just my obsessions. But for me, that aligned my actions with my understanding that what I fed within myself is what I was going to get more of. And I don't want more anger. You know, I don't want more revenge. I don't want retaliation. Those are not things that I want to be a part of my life. And so I don't feed my mind those things.
What do you feed it?
Actually, I spent a whole lot of time watching the cooking show. It is entertaining, But what I see is America the way it really looks. Chopped, that's really one of my favorites. I've just seen every variation of American I think that you possibly can find on that show. And it's just very accepting. Hearing men talk about their husbands or women talk about their wives, in the beginning that was like a jolt to me to hear that. But after hearing it so often and Chopped, it's like, well, okay. It's just life. It's just people living their lives. And I always get the sense that there's a sense of respect. I've never really watched a show where I thought, well, that guy lost because he's black, or that woman lost because she's gay. Those are the kinds of things that, that I watch. Now they've got a lot of Lifetime Christmas shows on, and so, that's kind of, I could almost tell you the script. I've seen so many of them. And with Black Lives Matter, I've noticed that they have also taken notice, and the girlfriend is no longer the only black person, in the show. That they actually have developed some with leading characters that are black and African American, and so I can really appreciate that.
Has that changed a lot over your lifetime, the representation that you've seen in the media?
Yes, absolutely, and not enough. I just bought a present for my grandson, and it was a science kit. And the characters on the box were all white. The professor was white, of course, and the boy and the girl. And nice that they have a boy and a girl, but of course they're both white. And, when my kids were small, we had a lot of books about nature and animals. And, if I couldn't, if it was one I really liked, I would just take crayon and color the characters. Give them put a little brown in it. And I don't have to do that anymore. But what I did do was get pictures off of my grandson's parents' Facebook page. And I put his family. I just print out some pictures and copy them and put him. So, not enough. It's as if I'm still an afterthought. Pick up an anthology, irrespective of what it's about. You're going to have maybe one black poet and maybe one black writer, and that writer might be Ralph Ellison, Maya Angelou, and you can pretty much know who it's going to be. But I'm also excited at all the new voices that are there. I'm excited about the nonfiction writers that are saying, well, if we can't count on other people to include us in the future, then we're going to have to write our own version of what the future is going to be like. So I'm enjoying discovering fantasy writers. The first was Octavia Butler. I really enjoyed her work, and so there's a whole new group of men and women that are coming, after her to fill that void. So that's been interesting. One of the things as I'm reading these futuristic stories, I always think our curse words ground us in the present. Surely we're not going to be using the F-bomb, 1,000 years from now. We'll have something totally new.
That's funny.
So use your imagination. Let's come up with some new curse words.
I love Octavia Butler, but sometimes I find myself, I have to read it in small doses because it's so dark, which I think looking around us, it's like, yes, I can see that path, but whew, it's real. Yeah, the parable of the sower is one I think could be very reflective of this time. And, this young girl who is able to foresee that our society is coming apart, and wherever we go, we're going to need food. So let me save those seeds. Yes. And carry them with me. But, even in her darkness, there's compassion. Mm-hmm. Because, I'm thinking in that novel, as she goes along, the people that come with her, because I think she starts out with just she and her brother.
And then along the way, she really gathers a tribe and shares her vision of the future, that change is the only thing we can really depend on. So she develops this theology of change and teaches it. And there are dark moments, but the seeds are, that's what's hopeful, because if you don't believe we're going to survive, then why are you keeping seeds? You don't need them. If we don't believe our society is going to evolve and change, why are immigrants still having children? Why are black people still reproducing? Why are we doing that? Because that is our hope for the future.
And that's really carrying the spirit of our ancestors.
Absolutely. I really have had some time to just reflect, and always go back to that, like the middle of the enslavement period, because the very first people had an experience of freedom. They had an experience of another life, and they were able to pass that experience on to their offspring. But I think when you get about to the middle of it, no one is alive who actually had that experience. So you're really living on stories of freedom. And maybe there were people who even never saw a black person that had any semblance of freedom. And yet those stories were so powerful that it gave people whatever they needed to survive those moments. Have their children pass on that story, that there is truth in the story, that freedom is a possibility, and we must do everything we can in our moments to get closer to that. And that story got passed on, and eventually there was the legal sense of it. But it was never just the legal sense of it. It was the spiritual sense of what does it mean to be free. And how do you find that space of freedom when everything around you tells you that that's never going to happen, that you don't matter, that you were simply born to live this existence. And that's all you or your children will ever have. But stories are really powerful things. So I don't take being a storyteller lightly. It's really important to me that all the stories that I tell, no matter how dark the story itself might be, that there are elements of hope in it. Because hope is really what keeps us alive. Jesse Jackson. So, keep hope alive.
So what is that? I'm curious what that means for you now. Like, what is the America that you see around you, and what are the stories that you're telling?
Wow, that's really a tough one. I have an older sister that's 10 years older than I am. She's 75, and she lived most of her life in Detroit. And she left the South for better opportunities to escape the racism that she experienced growing up. And when I saw her yesterday, she said that, this feels like going back. Wow. This feels like what I left. And that was really, really disheartening, to hear her say that. And I think there are a lot of black people that see that. One of my close friends that's an educator, upbeat, optimistic person, and her comment was that some people in this country would be happy if we were enslaved again. So, those are the kinds of thoughts that people are having. And I would like to say that, those are not realistic, but I have to say, yes, they are. That is a real possibility. I mean, you know, just think about the Supreme Court decision in 1954 reversed the Supreme Court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson. So what's to say? As much as, you know, I would like to think that we live in a country that would never tolerate that, I can't say that I truly believe that. You know, the fact that there's any question about who will be our next president just boggles my mind.
Well, we have immigrants in concentration camps, so, I mean...
500 children whose parents are gone. It's not that far. And while, you know, your generation may see this as something new, that's not true. That's what happened with Native American families all over the continent, not just in the United States, where Native American children were taken from their families and sent off to boarding schools and indoctrinated to hate who they were. You know, that happened in Canada, it happened in Australia, it happened in South Africa. But if we really don't know our history, then we see each of these iterations as something that's new. No, it's not new. It is an old pattern. It is an old pattern. I don't know where this country thinks my future and that of my grandchildren may be. So for me, what I have to do is, again, go back and say, my exterior circumstances may be completely controlled by someone else. My interior space, I have some control over that. And how I interpret what's happening to me will influence how I see the future. You know, one of the things that, how important language is, there's a difference between being a slave and being enslaved. You know, my ancestors were enslaved. They were not slaves. Slavery did not define who they were. And in so many ways, they constantly spoke for themselves and told us who they were. You know, the words, the food that we cooked, the music that we produced, the dancing that we did. I mean, just think about an enslaved person dancing, falling in love, having a wedding, celebrating the birth of a child, choosing to name that child a name that projected a future. I mean, those are all individual strikes at oppression and enslavement. And so going back to that, I can say that we will live, and I don't want to say we survive, because survival is not enough. It's not enough. If you only survive, eventually you die. So how is it that we're able to live in an environment with so much uncertainty? And to say, for me, so much of my life as a person of African descent in this country is uncertain. So I live with uncertainty. And it becomes the background music to my life. And I think that's true for most African Americans. You know, sometimes we're able to completely block out that noise. It's like just having a conversation with people and they're talking about the good old days, and halfway I think, no, those were not my good old days. You know, my good old days were at the back of the bus and somebody could come in and drag me out and lynch me or burn a cross on my yard. Nothing would be done about it. You know, those were the good old, those were the days that you're talking about. But that's not all that happened within those days. So it's keeping these two things present at the same time. W.B. Boyce has a quote, and he talks about this double consciousness. Always being aware of myself as a Black person and also as an American, and trying constantly to reconcile those two things, because they are both true at the same time. And to hold on to both of those. And, you know, what do I feed? Well, I want to feed both of them, and sometimes it's harder than others. And this is a time when it gets to be a bit harder to see the American piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
It gets very hard to see because just my life has less value to too many people in this country. And, you know, that can be crouched in so many buzzwords. But when it's all said and done, my life is less valuable. My husband and I were talking about the vaccine and, you know, where we might stand as a couple, you know, in the line of, you know, who gets when and where. And, you know, African Americans and people of color, we're the caboose. You know, whatever new flashy thing comes along, whatever new government program comes along, we got to fight our way into it. We're not welcomed into it. We've got to litigate to get it. You know, just imagine how much money we have spent on litigation. I mean, really, what was the cost of Brown versus the Board of Education? I mean, just in terms of dollars. What was the cost of that? And how could we have spent that money? And think of all the things that we're still litigating. You know, how much did it cost for them to decide that nobody was responsible for Breonna Taylor's death? And all the litigation that will come to get laws changed. Monetarily, the amount of money we have spent just to prove that we are human beings. And I don't have any other answer than to say, we just keep doing it. You know, we just keep doing it.
I'm curious, since you mentioned you and your husband and a vaccine, what it's been like since he's white, what your experience has been since you've been together.
You know, amazingly enough, very accepting. Very accepting. I'm going to say that whatever people have thought, they've kept it to themselves, and I'm very appreciative of that. And people have been judicious in not sharing with me. I don't know if his friends share with him what other people have said about us, and I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So I'm not getting the pass-through, and I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. It's been really eye-opening too. I think it's really softened me in some of the conversations I have with people who presume that, you know, because I live here, that my life experience has been what their life experience has been, and only consider that I've had the same opportunities they have. That's the extent of how they think about, you know, the racial climate in this country. And I'm also seeing that people don't always see their actions as being racist. They simply have no concept of things that they say that are offensive.
What is that like for you when you're just dealing with ignorance?
Well, you know, I try to look at the intent. You know, most of the times the intent is not to be hurtful. They honestly feel that it's complimentary. So when someone says, "You're very educated. You're well educated." Oh my gosh. You know, I probably don't say thank you, but I'll smile. And most of the time, people aren't really interested in any kind of in-depth conversation. They're not interested in learning, and it takes so much energy to do that. You know, and if it's someone that I think is open to having conversations and rethinking some of what they believe to be true, but many other people are not. And I had a really close friend. She lived to be, I think, 98, and she actually was my husband's teacher. She taught school for over 50 years. And when I started going to his church, she and I really did become very, very good friends. I don't know, I think I probably was the only black person she really ever got to know. And when, for a brief moment, the public school system in Hancock County went from all white to an integrated system, she taught. And then when John Hancock was built, that was the all-white school, she went to teach there. And I don't know that she would, if I had asked her, you know, why did she do that? And I never did. I don't think she would have thought that was a racist decision. I think she would have said, you know, that was a religious decision, and that was the cover that many of these schools were built under. We want to be able to, we want to be able to continue teaching our religion. Well, whatever you were teaching before the schools were integrated, you probably could have kept on teaching after they were integrated. But, you know, sometimes it's too painful to really question ourselves. And so it's just much easier to put that little bit of frosting on it and go ahead and eat the cake. And I would say that she was she was very accepting. I really came to love and appreciate her. You know, she shared many things about her life, and she didn't have an easy life. And I think she came to appreciate me, and she never missed an opportunity to tell me, you know, how important I was to her. In fact, she'd often tell my husband, "You really picked a good one when you picked Jeanette." So I think he was a little jealous that maybe I was nudging in to be one of her favorites. But I treasure that, I treasure that friendship. And could we have gone deeper? I don't know. I didn't. You know, I didn't. Some of it was age. I mean, I didn't meet her until, you know, she was in her late 80s, and just did not want to bring that into our friendship. But I do. I count that as a really genuine friendship, and I felt genuine love and appreciation for her. But that is not an excuse for the kinds of relationships where, well, Jean, she talked about having a maid and how poor they were, and I kept thinking, well, if you were poor, my goodness, how poor must the maid have been? You're poor and you have a maid?
Yeah, there's poor and then there's poor.
Right. But, you know, those kinds of relationships that there is no authenticity to. And as Southerners, we're really nice, and I'm really taking a lot of, I have a lot of problems with that, with being nice. And we're nice to each other. But nice really has no value to change anything.
There's no intimacy in nice.
Nice, nothing at all. It is, I pass you, you pass me. I really don't care what's happening in your life. And yeah, I see all these things that maybe are going on, but I'm not moved to do anything, make any real change. I'm just going to be nice to you.
We're going to live on this side of town, and you're going to live on this side of town. We pass each other at the store,
and
like you
said.
And
we wave, and we're nice to each other. You know, your son is going to get stopped because he's driving a very nice car, and he might not make it home. But when I see you, I will tell you how really sorry I am that happened to your son. But I'm going to reelect the same sheriff. I'm going to reelect the same congressman and local representatives. You know, I really don't think people should have AK-47s in their home. But I'm going to be nice about it. And I'm going to continue to vote for the same people I have been voting for, because those people make my life comfortable. And they maintain the world that I know. And I don't know what would happen if you really were free. I really don't know if you had the same opportunities that I had. Maybe my son won't be at the top of the class. Maybe he will no longer be the valedictorian, or my daughter the salutatorian.
I sometimes wonder, too, if white people don't subconsciously or consciously fear that, like, oh, black people might turn around and treat us the way that we've been treating them for hundreds of years. And that says a lot, I think, about how much we know is actually going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, historically, we have not.
Right.
And I think some of the most compassionate people, for the most part, are people who have been oppressed, because they know what that is and know the cost of it. You know, and I think too that, you know, change, you know, whether we see change as something that happens gradually or whether we see change as evolution, that there are not many Nelson Mandelas in the world. There are not many warriors who then can become peacemakers. And so the warrior is not necessarily the one who can lead into the future. But it's hard to let go. You know, it's hard for someone who has spent their life working for this, and they finally see that they're there to say, I've done my role. You know, my role was to get us here. My role was the fight, whether that's a legal fight or a revolution. Now it's time to call on other skills. And that's very hard for us to do. Revolution often presents the same thing. I mean, it's a George Orwell Animal Farm kind of world. And maybe that's just our human nature. So can we live beyond our human nature? And I'm going to say yes, because one Nelson Mandela means that there are others. So he is, to me, a possibility. There was something I read on Facebook, and it just talked about time and what time can do with us and to us as human beings. And it said if Maya Angelou had died in her 20s, she would have died as a prostitute. But, you know, Maya Angelou lived into her 80s and inspired millions of people around the world. Malcolm X, you know, had he died in his 20s, he would have been Detroit Red. And he's one of my change agents, because that trip to Mecca, he experienced something he had never experienced in this country, and he saw a possibility of humanity coming together around some common beliefs. You know, in Mecca, everybody's on level ground. You know, my brother is a Muslim, and so he made his pilgrimage. And he said, you have no idea who's standing next to you, because you're all dressed alike. And there are no titles. And he saw that. Malcolm X saw that. And, you know, he was able to come home and say, I saw something I hadn't seen. And I think that is an indictment of Christianity. Such an indictment of our so-called Christian nation. That he saw something, and now Islam is demonized. And yet Islam had that capacity to show, you know, this really hardened man. I won't say he hated white people, but he absolutely believed that there was no real possibility of peace in this country between black and white people. And he saw something, he saw a possibility, and he was able to come back and say, that's a possibility. And so, yeah, we can look around the world and, you know, and we can see these possibilities. That gives me hope. And I think that can give us hope. That can give us a path towards the future. I don't think that we have a path towards the future historically in this country. And I don't think you can get to the future unless you actually really start with the truth of your past. And, you know, this image of, you know, these freedom-seeking people who came to this country to be religiously free, and, you know, maybe there were a few people who thought that way, but they also thought themselves superior. and entitled to what really belonged to someone else. There's I think a parallel between, what happened when those early explorers came and the devastation to the native populations between now and the virus that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just devastating Black communities. In Hancock County, with a population of about 8,500 people, 44 people have died. And I know what small town, I mean, that's my home, that's where I grew up. There's only one public school system. So almost everybody in that county is connected to those 44 people in some way. So can you imagine in a period of 7 or 8 months, 44 people in your family are gone? But, that's what happened when the explorers came. They brought their diseases that there was no immunity to. And those that weren't killed by disease, they just simply murdered. You guys give me hope. You are my hope. That you're sitting and, I'm able to, share my ideas and my thoughts with you. You've come into a community to learn, not to teach or to tell. And you just tell the story as you hear it. Not inflecting your ideas of what could be, what should be, but letting people speak of their own life experience and believing that they can adequately interpret their life experience. And I think that matters. That to me is one of the things that I find most frustrating living in an environment like this. My experience it's not heard. Mm-hmm. And when I do talk about my experience, there is a discounting of it, that you can't really believe that. Well, yeah, I do really believe that, because that's what my life has taught me. I shared with, one of my neighbors that I've never felt a good relationship with the police. Even though I personally have not had any bad experiences with police, my radar goes up anytime I see a police car. I don't see the police as my friends. And I've always felt that way, based on my collective experience. And I understand that other people don't feel that way. I do. And so when we hear of these situations where, a mother has called the police to help with her son, it's because she has no other alternative. Mm-hmm. She's at the end of her rope. Believe me, that was not the first thought in her mind. She tried everything else she knew to do, and that was her last resort. But that is my lived collective experience. Mm. So when I say I fully expect to have to fight to get in line for the antidote to the virus, that is my lived experience. And, I don't want anyone to try to make me feel better about it. Just accept that that's my lived experience. And, if you want to be able to do something about it, then we can talk about that. But if you don't, just accept that I can interpret my life. And I can see what's happening with the people around me who look like me. And it really has more to do with who look like me, not about how much money we have or how many degrees we have behind our names, or what neighborhood we have, or what car we drive. It's not that. It is just the color of our skin dictates so much of our life in this country. And I know that.
It's so challenging that there's such a disconnect for people. I even see it with the pandemic, like people who are like, well, I'm not sick and nobody that I've seen around me is sick, so it must not exist. It's like, well, I don't see racism, so it's not a thing. Right, it's just like, right. which really speaks to, I think, how segregated we still are, which I think it's easy for me as somebody that's new to living in the South to be like, that's a Southern problem. But it's, I mean, New York City is the same way. It's not, we live very isolated lives. And that's a real problem for white people because our imagination is just so tiny.
Well, again, I accept that is your lived experience, and all I can ask is make room for your lived experience for mine.
Yeah.
And when I can share my lived experience with you, then we begin to talk about, where do we intersect? That's if someone is willing to have these conversations, and they're not easy conversations to have. I imagine it's very, very painful to realize that everything that you have really believed about Black people or Black history it's just built on a lie. That has to be pretty devastating to really the people that you trusted, that you loved. I can remember one of my storytelling friends talking about believe everything your parents tell you. And she said, well, that's how racism gets passed on. So no, maybe you don't need to believe everything your parents tell you.
Good point.
At some point, we need to question what our parents have told us.
Or in Proverbs where it says, be obedient to your parents at all times.
At all times.
Well,
right.
What if they're teaching me this?
Right. I was just reading that. And I think, maybe somewhere else there's a caveat.
And also, written by men who lived in a time where there's things going on that we don't want to go on today.
No, that we don't want to go on. And I think that, I think the average white person did not want Breonna Taylor to be murdered in her bed. But I also think they're not motivated enough to believe that that could happen to them. That's the blindness that racism brings. When drugs were, quote unquote, invading the Black communities, even that's now questionable whether that was even true to the extent that it was promoted. It was the idea, well, that's them. And now it's your child who's addicted to opioids that, they're getting from your cabinet. But they're not criminals, they're sick. They have a mental illness and we need to treat that. But even that, no money has really been allocated to it, so it's still just lip service. It's just still lip service. When 22 of your children are just slaughtered, and you're not motivated for gun control? I mean, I that just boggles my mind.
If not 22 kindergartners, what's going to do it?
Right. If 22 beautiful, innocent children who were going to change the world, if not that, or, flip that script, if the school massacres were all African American, what do you think would have happened? Every young Black man probably would be in prison for something. Black schools would be locked down.
And yet a white boy can walk into a church.
Right.
And shoot a Black community. Yeah.
And the police take him to get food.
I'm feeling rage just in this moment. How do you handle that? How do you deal with this?
Well, because if I was enraged all the time, I lose my possibility of influence, of change. So I have a friend. I think you've met Marion.
I don't know.
Warren. He's in the wheelchair.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Marion is my alter ego. And what I say to him is, okay, Marion, you do that. You make the trouble. You get mad. You get angry. So I can go do this interview. So there is a place for the Marions of the world, and I appreciate them. And I let him know, yes, I want you doing what you're doing, because that means I don't have to. I can go work. We want the same end. And so I can go expend my energy and use my gifts in some other capacity. You think about Thurgood Marshall, and I often go back and think about, You know, his single greatest accomplishment took his lifetime. It took his lifetime. You know, being on the Supreme Court, that was kind of a nice thing to do. And he certainly earned it, and he certainly deserved it. But think of all the people that were behind him so that he could do that. Someone else had to type the letters. Someone else had to clean the toilets. Someone else had to raise money.
A lot of women.
A lot of women, yes. But someone else had to support all of that. And all of them are as important as he was. Mm-hmm. And none of that could have happened without that whole network of people. The Montgomery boy, that's another one of my historical points of view that I go back to. And oftentimes as Black people, we buy what we are being fed, that we don't cooperate, we don't get along, that we don't work together, that we have a crab mentality. If you want to hide something from a Black person, put it in a book. And there are times when we buy those kinds of things. And I can remember being I think it was at a community picnic, and someone said that to me. And I just stood and I just said, look around. I mean, just look. You're standing in a place that contradicts what you believe, and yet you're going to believe your thought rather than your eyes. Chances are that person goes to a Black church. These churches have been around for over 100 years. They would not have survived if we didn't cooperate. You know, and the bus boycott. I mean, they had no cell phones. Most people didn't own cars. They were working minimum jobs, you know, maids and porters and garbage workers. And yet, for a year, they organized themselves and nobody rode the bus. The bus system went broke. If that's not cooperation, I don't know what is. So, you know, I go back to those moments when the sum of the sum of the parts was so much greater. Mm-hmm. And it took all of that cooperation. I mean, imagine, I don't know if we could even replicate that today. Mm-hmm. But imagine what it took to do all of that. There's no internet, there's no Facebook, no Twitter, no cell phone. Most people didn't even have telephones.
Wow.
I mean, it's miraculous. But they did it, and they won. So, you know, those are the moments that I go back to, and I say, yeah, it's possible. And the police at that time, you know, were not even trying to hide the harassment and the brutality. They had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to those people. And yet every day they got up and they went about their business. Terrified, exposing their children, and they did it. So who am I to complain? I mean, I have food in the refrigerator, I have a few pennies in the bank, I have a car, I have a cell phone, computer, a nice home. And I'm not minimizing the difficulties we face today. I'm not minimizing that. I'm simply saying that as long as Black people have been in this country, we've used whatever means we had to change our lives. So I will use whatever means I have at my disposal. And, you know, what I have is my voice and a pen. You know, those are the tools that the gifts that I've been blessed with. And so those are the tools that I'll use, my voice and my pen. And I will support the Marion Warrens of the world to do what they do. Because without him doing what he does, it would be more difficult for me to focus on doing what I'm doing. I know that we will win, and I don't know when means getting to a place. I think when is continuing to do those things that feed us hopefulness and being open to other people coming into the struggle with us to seeing you and not deciding I know who you are based on what you look like or where you came from or what your education is. Just a funny story. I have a neighbor that is 50. She's the youngest person out here. And she has some physical limitations. And I've gotten to know her. And so I was looking for someone who would be a proofreader. And so she and I talked. And I thought, well, why don't we do this together? She's interested in writing. I'm interested in writing. We can encourage each other and hold each other accountable and give each other a kick when, we're not writing anything. And so I gave her my story, and she sent it back to me with all these corrections, these punctuation corrections. I'm thinking, that is the last person I would have ever thought would be a good proofreader. So, I had made a presumption about her intellectual capacity that was completely wrong. I'm glad I was just open, and I could see she's a good proofreader, so I have a proofreader that I don't have to pay. I type her material and she proofreads mine.
Wow.
I want to stay open to that. I don't want to decide I hate you because you're white or because you're rich or, you have a PhD in brain surgery or whatever. I want to be open to how can we enrich each other's lives. You have something to teach me, and I hope you'll be open that there's something that I can teach and learn from you. I do work on that openness. It's not always there. I have to certainly say that, there are some comments people meet and the brain just goes like, oh, that's it, And that's not a bad thing because I do have to protect myself. I have to guard my self-worth. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't want to let in a lot of things that a lot of people who say I'm less than, I'm not worth this, or my people have never made any contributions to the world whatsoever. So that I want to phase out, but to be judicious and saying I don't want to close my mind to people, because I really do in my heart believe in the beloved community. And, what can I add to it? If I'm closing myself to people, then I'm no longer a part of that beloved community. And I believe the only way I can be is to be open and let people tell me who they are, not to, not to prejudge. And, and that's not to say that, I'm going to attend the Ku Klux Klan rally to see, because they've already told me who they are. So I have to guess about that. It is a struggle, but it is a worthwhile struggle. It is absolutely a worthwhile struggle. And I think, with all those people who made the sacrifice, when it came to the end of their life and when they could speak, they all felt that it was worthwhile. And, Dr. King's words and, at the very end of his life when he says, I know you're going to get there. I may not get there with you, but I know you'll get there. And I know that we will too. I don't see it in my generation, but then again, I could be pleasantly surprised because I never expected to see a Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. And, I just love the fact of the name. Barack Hussein Obama.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
That is hopefulness. Yeah, that is hopefulness. And now we get another opportunity to see what the opposite of that is. Mm-hmm. And I think many people are saying, well, maybe Barack Hussein Obama was too far. But Donald Trump, we don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I'm looking ahead, and now writing adds to my voice as a storyteller. So I'm getting excited about the stories that I can tell and finding an audience for that. So in my 60s, I'm advancing my career. I'm not thinking about retirement. I'm thinking about I have a lot to say, and I'd like to live to be into my hundreds, so, I have another 40-some years. You know, what am I going to do with 40 years ahead of me? So.
It makes me so grateful because as the person receiving your stories and your lived experience like that, you know, you and so many of the people that you've been calling in and speaking about, you know, the bus boycotters, like they made the world safer for all of us. I benefit from that deeply, you know, so thank you.
And, you know, we have to keep their stories alive because when their stories die, the wisdom that they brought into the world is gone. So yeah, we can push through this, and we are equipped to push through this. And I think that's the part that maybe my generation didn't do as well with our children as my parents did with us, is that we felt that the battle had been won. And that we no longer had to tell those stories. And now we're seeing that it is that collective storytelling that keeps us from falling into that lull of saying, you know, it's okay. We can abandon our institutions because those things are now part of the larger society, and you know, they simply never became part of the larger society. So yes, I do want to hold on to, you know, my black church. And you know, I guess I just thought everyone knew that, you know, the black church was an activist church, and I guess they don't. You know, the root of resistance in this country has always been rooted in the church, in some spiritual realm.
Could you speak about that a little bit? I don't think a lot of people do realize
that.
Well, because the white church, so I grew up in the white church, and so I feel like that's not a part of the white church. So I think it is news. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I just think largely in my life experience, I haven't seen activism be a role in the white church. So
yeah, the black church, you know, one of the instruments of oppression has been religion, because you know, the slave master said, you know, you're sons of Ham, and you're intended to be hewers of wood and carriers of water. You know, that was the thing. But African people arrived here with a sense of spirituality and a relationship with God. And so they instinctively understood that, I don't know what God you're talking about, but that's not the God of the universe I know. So they were able to use that as an instrument for their liberation. So often the church and the preacher that had been chosen by the slave master, the slaveholder, was one of the liberators. He was the one that was, you know, going into the groves and saying, you forget all that stuff I said, you know, out front. That was just for master. Let me tell you what's really going on.
Wow.
And let me tell you about the Underground Railroad. And let me tell you about, you know, what was going on. You know, the enslaved people were so invisible that, you know, they would have the enslaved person standing there as they talk about their battle plans. Liberation theology, it has always been rooted in our spirituality. Harriet Tubman, you know, feels that God gave her visions. Nat Turner, the same thing. Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, all rooted in the black church. And so it was an instrument of freedom. It was an antidote to oppression. So many of the traditions in the black church sought to insulate us from the dehumanizing circumstances of enslavement and oppression, which is why women are addressed as sister and men as brother, and your deacon this and your reverend that. Because that restores our connection to humanity, and it elevates our humanity. That we recognize you as part of a brotherhood, of a sisterhood. You know, wearing your best clothing to church, presenting yourself. You know, that's why fashion and all of these things, we've lost the essence of why those things mattered. It wasn't about looking good. It was about restoring your humanity to each other, giving each other your best, the best that I can dress myself, the best that I can present myself, the dish that I can bring that is the best, the song that I can sing, the dance that I can give you the very best and know that you will accept it and not judge it as being less than something else. And so yeah, there's a long history. You know, Martin Luther King had most of his meetings were in churches. Reverend C.T. Vivian that just passed away, John Lewis. I mean, these are all the Southern Christian leadership were all based in the Black church. That is part of our tradition, our self-help tradition. In the church that I belong to, we still have we call it a society, but really it's a burial fund where you pay I think it's like $1 to join, and it's 25 cents or 50 cents when somebody dies, and you know that's just like a little amount of money that could maybe pay for a burial plot, or you know, pay for the repast for the family. But we still do that. But these were always through the church that people sought to improve their life. The very first schools were in churches. Some of the first colleges were all started by church groups. So, you know, when they talk about, you know, their religious affiliation, it's just not window dressing. It is really about, you know, the gospel that says when Christ has set you free, you are free indeed. It is all about freedom, all about brotherhood. Nonviolence, you know, that is steeped in our spirituality. So no, we do learn to pray, and some good singing and some good preaching, but we expect you to get out there and do something.
That sounds like real community.
It is
to me. Yeah.
It is real community. I mean, so much of my early life, it was in the church. It was, you know, seeing the ladies, the ushers, and the ones who would come to your house when somebody was sick, and you know the church have a fund, and you know maybe it's $5, but you know that was that hard-earned $5 that you know people had saved their pennies to see, and you know the church would come and pray for you, and sometimes they would bring, when my mom was not going to church anymore, and sometimes the preacher and the deacons would just come to her house and just have a little church service. Wow. You know, they'd bring her church.
Wow.
It is a real community, but not, and again, it is a community based on action. The gospel is action. What is that? Faith without works is dead. You might hear that a lot in the Black church. We expect your faith to have feet. We expect you to do something. We expect you to get out and vote. You know, we expect you to show up at this rally. And our church sermons marry our current reality with the gospel. And so for me, I see the gospel as something to be lived. It's both past and current history. And that's how traditional Black churches carry that word. And to some extent, you know, that might be changing as churches become integrated. The church that I went to in Atlanta for a long time was an integrated church in name only. And that social gospel, that social justice gospel never penetrated the church. And so many things that were big happenings in our community, in the Black community, it just didn't make it. You know, it just didn't make it to the Sunday morning. Believe me, a whole lot of Black preachers on Sunday morning on Zoom or however they're doing church will be telling their congregations, and they will say, I cannot tell you who to vote for, but I will tell you who I am voting for. I can tell you that.
How do you see that working between generations? Because I kind of have a sense that the younger generations are not as tied to the church now as they used to be.
They are not, and you know, that has a lot to do with our generation wanting to, this is human nature, and I've come to accept that But we just want to stay that usher until we are crippled and we are in a wheelchair. We're not ready to step down as deacon, as preacher, as secretary, as whatever that position is. We're holding on to it for dear life. And we have frozen out our younger generation. I mean, think. My mother lived to be 90, but most people in her generation didn't live that long. They were dying in their 60s. And so you had a natural progression because people just died and somebody younger replaced them. But we're living longer now and we're healthier into a longer age. And so we just think, well, I'm supposed to hold on this until God takes me home. No, no. So we got those positions and we're just holding on to them for dear life. And that falls on us because we have not allowed young people to come in and have the gospel speak to them in their life where they are. They're at a different place than we are. But as a church, we believe that the gospel is eternal. And so it will always speak of the present. And we've not allowed young people to have that experience. What is the gospel saying to you in your present life now? Not what what I've already digested and I'm giving you regurgitated spirituality. We've not allowed them to find it. And, I believe you find it in the work, not sitting, cross-legged and humming or staying in prayer all day. You find it as you live. We have given them too few opportunities. And I do see that beginning to change again because, us old folks are just dying off. And it's making room for. But isn't that what nature does?
I was going to say it evolved, right? So,
yeah.
So the message has to evolve with the seasonal changes.
Right.
So.
And the core message doesn't change. God is love. It does not change. But how that is reflected gets changed. So now instead of, maybe my gay brother and sister, which we all know people who were in the music department that were gay. And nobody simply said anything. We all knew it. So maybe just tolerating his gayness, maybe now I can accept him as who he really is because God is love and love means love my brother. So now a younger generation can work those things through in their life experience. God is love does not change. And there are no caveats to that. It just says God is love. It doesn't say love this, love that. No, it just says God is love. So it's good to see younger people. Yeah, the Black church is really a very strong, it just has a very strong place in my life. And I miss the music. I miss the exuberance. I miss the dancing and the singing and the hugs. I do. I miss all of that. Oh.
I want to just ask something, or just mention something that I connected with myself growing up in the white church in the South, and it was about being in charge. It was like we're going to use Scripture mostly to make sure that we are in charge and that our pride remains over everything. An example of that would be Martin Luther King's name is never said in any of the white churches that I spent time in. And why would no? These people are amazing. And in fact, one might argue that MLK is one of the most, extraordinary Christians of modern history,
our generation,
right? Or a Harriet Tubman too. And yet absolutely. I don't hear any stories about them in church. I don't when it's MLK's holiday weekend, we're not talking about that. We're not celebrating that.
Yeah, Martin. What is really extraordinary about him is that Martin Luther King came from Black elite. He absolutely, for a Black person, would have had an amazing life. He could have preached at Ebenezer the rest of his life. And yet there was something more powerful than that. More powerful than a life of ease and comfort. And he surrendered that life of ease and comfort for what his life became. And I don't think we really talk enough about that. He was really born to a Black privileged life, you know, to walk away from all of that. And, you know, while Malcolm X was born with the exact opposite early life experience, his father was a preacher, and he was part of the Marcus Garvey movement. He was murdered on the train tracks. He was beaten to death and then thrown on the train tracks. So that was his early experience. And of course, you know, Detroit Red and all of that. But once he was into the Nation of Islam, he was a favored son. And he could have lived the rest of his life with a life of ease, protected by the nation. And yet, he actually believed their code of ethics. And he expected Elijah Muhammad to live it. Imagine that. And when he didn't, he spoke about it. When he realized that he was abusing these young girls, he spoke out about it. And it cost him his life. But he could have easily turned a blind eye, just like all of the other leaders in the Nation of Islam were doing. He could have turned a blind eye to that and lived out his life in leisure. But he chose not to.
Which is where that like direct relationship with God or source is so important, because your environment can justify all kinds of nonsense.
All kinds of things. But you know, we have those examples of men who said, no, this is not right. And I can't live with this. I cannot go on. I'm willing to risk my life and the life of my family to make this better. I mean, that's really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be something if men would do that today?
Wouldn't it? Yes.
In DC right now.
Yes, absolutely. So when I look at those lives, those are examples for me. You know, those are people that now, you know, I certainly don't have their platform. You know, I don't think there's anybody out to kill me because of, you know, a podcast I'm doing. I mean, I'm not in that arena, but it does embolden me to speak when I think that, you know, there's an opportunity. So it does encourage me in that way, that it matters, and that there are people that are ethical, regardless of who they call God to be. There are men and women. Mother Teresa, I mean, she left a comfortable life to love the people that were discarded and dying. They inspire me, and I think they can also inspire another generation if those are the stories that we are willing to tell. So this new group of Black writers and filmmakers, you know, the YouTube channels and the books and you know, the scholarship that is finally being applied. I mean, even something as simple as hair care. Finally, there's research into how to best care for Black hair. And we're actually getting products that, you know, still kind of hit or miss, but there's a whole lot more to choose from. So, you know, all of this says we're making progress on so many fronts, and yet this does not filter into the mass consciousness. And I think that's the disconnect that we have now with so much control of the media being in the hands of people who feel like it's their job to maintain the status quo. And yet all around us, people are finding ways to tell their story and to get another perspective out. And so, you know, that's exciting. You know, things like TED, I really like the TED Talks. And you see such diversity in the TED Talks. And, you know, here's this kid who's building windmills or, you know, who's working to bring electricity to a village that didn't have it, or, you know, get clean water. And so, you know, it is exciting to see what's going on in the world. So, yeah, I want to feed myself those things. No, I'm not burying my head in the sand and saying these other things are not going on. But, what do I want to feed myself on a daily basis? No, I want to feed myself that. And these other things are not an afterthought, but these other things keep me abreast of what's happening. And these bright spots keep me abreast of what's possible. And so, that's where I want to spend my time. Let's talk about what is possible. And that, to me, is where life gets exciting. What is possible? And everything is possible.
You inspire me for sure. And I mean, to speak to your point, like, you may not have Martin Luther King's platform, but I think what you show me is that, like, in your life, you are using all of your tools to speak your truth and to uplift people and to share wisdom. And, like, I'm really humbled by that and grateful that you have given your life to that. So thank you.
And I am coming to appreciate the value of my gift. For so long, I really did just take it for granted. And I thought it was something everyone can do. I know everyone has a gift, and I thought, well, you know what, that maybe everyone has that gift. And just to come to realize that most people would rather be hung by their toenails than speak in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
I'm running to the microphone where everybody else is going that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am enjoying the gift and really appreciating and saying yes to whenever there is an opportunity to use it and maybe reach a broader audience. And so I do. I'm very thankful for you guys.
So mutual. Thank you. We talk about you a lot, too.
Yeah.
Well, thank
absolutely. You're definitely one of those amazing teachers. Yeah.
I have really had the opportunity to really learn from just some incredibly amazing people. And, my career has not been one where it didn't give me material wealth. I lived in a comfortable life, but it didn't bring me material wealth. And sometimes I find that is disappointing when I'm comparing myself to somebody else. I find that disappointing. But when I really do sit back and I think about the moments that have meant the most to me, it has just really been in the company of just really incredible people who saw me not based on where I was economically, but simply saw me as someone of value and shared their wisdom with me, but also allowed me into their life. And we learned from each other. Guy Malber and Wilma Ardeen. Wilma was a nutritionist, and she and Guy, after retiring, a nonprofit called Youth Leadership for Global Health. And they really believed that if they taught young people about the preventable health issues and equipped them to share that with their friends and their families, that those young people could have an influence on the health of their immediate families and their bigger communities. So they would mentor them all year long, maybe 15 or 20 young people, mentor them all year long, and then they would raise enough money to go on a health tour. They went to South Africa, they went to Guyana, they went to the Cherokee Nation. That was just amazing. And these were just two ordinary people who used their influence to change the life of some young people. So, those are the kind of people that I have been just so fortunate and just so privileged to rub elbows with, and I miss them. But, they had lived such extraordinary lives, and they didn't think it beneath themselves to work with these young people. And so, just seeing how much they were willing to give of their resources. And so when I meet people like that, how can I sit and say, oh, well, I'm just going to retire now. I'm not going to worry about the rest of the world or, connecting with the young people and, part of their world. It's like, yeah, I want to be active, until I'm 100. I'm not planning on being 100 and incapacitated. No, I'm going to be 100 and I'm going to be there on my cane and my motorcycle saying, all right, move over, I'm coming.
I see it.
Yeah. I can see it.
And I pray for our generation and younger too, that we realize like what a resource the older generations are, you know, that we can really learn from each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I have just been fortunate most of my life to have younger and older friends. That really keeps me, you know, it keeps me aware of challenges that a younger generation have. Maybe I didn't have those challenges, but some of the same strategies that have been helpful to me can also be useful and helpful to them. You know, the people that are in my circle, if you looked at that circle, it would really be a very, very diverse circle. And I keep wanting to add, you know, to that diversity.
Well, if people want to connect with you, where would be a good place for them to do that? Are you on Facebook?
Yes, it's just Jeanette Waddell.
Thank you.
And the email, I can,
okay.
It's Vaughn, VAUGHN, the word family, and the number 21 at Juno.com. And yes, Juno is still a legitimate email carrier. So.
If you want to hear more about Jeanette's life, especially her early life in Hancock County in rural Georgia, check out episode 37. You can find that and many other conversations wherever you get your podcasts or maurajames.com. I love you.